morning. I'm Melanie Risdon with the Western Standard. Thanks for joining me this morning. And also joining me is James Kitchen. He is a Calgary lawyer, Alberta lawyer. You sort of serve across the country, don't you?
I do.
Yeah, you do. We have the technology to do that these days. So James is joining us today. We're going to be talking about a few things, including human rights laws, charter laws, constitutional laws, and just, having a good look at what's happening with the mandates within our country, and talk about what's happening around the world in some places. But give me an idea of your experience. What you used to work for JCCF, you're now on your own with your own firm.
That's right. I did a lot of charter litigation at the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, which was great. A good learning experience, baptism by fire. I got thrown into litigating a lot of really tough cases really early on in my career. So I was very blessed that way. So I felt like it was time for me to go out on my own. So I started my own practice on July 1st of 2021.
And have been busy.
The first month was great. I only worked normal full-time hours, and then August hit, and I was busy, as some people probably have known because they've tried to get a hold of me, and I've told them, look, I can't take any more clients. I work alone. I don't have anybody else to work with yet. So there's only so many clients I can take on. But I've done quite a bit, and I try to do as much as I can for students and employees and all the many clients I have.
Now, refresh my memory. Do you represent union or a broad range of employees?
So far, I have not represented any unionized employees. That's been by design. I've tried to shuffle them off to people like Derek Frum and others. Poor suckers. I don't like employment law. I have gotten sucked into it a bit. I just had a hearing in New Brunswick this morning where I had to argue that my unionized clients should be able to come to the court to get a constitutional remedy. So I've gotten sucked into it, and I think that's just inevitable because that's what's going on right now.
Right.
Thousands of people are left in the lurch because their unions are woke and refuse to grieve their rights violations, and so they're left wondering, what do I do?
Right. What options do I have?
Yeah. So, but I tend to just take regular employees who are not part of a union.
Mm-hmm. Now, you also mentioned that you are representing people who've gotten fines or tickets and things of that nature as well for I don't know, I'm assuming mandate breaches or I think you said rallies for, yeah.
Yes, I still have a couple clients that are facing, public health tickets. For example, I have a church in Edmonton with the Rebel, actually funded by the Democracy Fund. They got a series of tickets for public health infractions because they were holding church and been allowed to hold church. So just had a couple of those tickets dropped, actually. So I have a trial in April on that. I got a couple other businesses that have gotten public health tickets. I have some businesses that I've been advising that could potentially turn into big fights with AHS. So yeah, anything to do with public health, I have a couple of doctor clients, so I'm regularly litigating against AHS, which is always interesting. So yeah, there's quite a wide diversity. People get a hold of my information, and if it's a really tough case that they can't get anybody else to help them with, and if I can squeeze them in, then I do my best.
Mm-hmm. So I had reached out to you the other day on the kind of reversal that Shell put out about their vaccine policy, their mandate for site workers to show proof of vaccination. Now they have reversed that, and you commented on that, saying you felt that was a very wise business decision. You said that there were sort of two things that could be happening there. Do you want to kind of rehash that with me here?
Sure. It's interesting because if you can set aside all the humanity and the ethics and the justice of this stuff and just look at it from a business sense, it just doesn't make any sense. Now, maybe being woke is a good moneymaker. I don't know. I don't see how it is, but apparently it must be because a lot of these big businesses that aren't in what would be a woke industry, right? You have oil companies, right? That's not a woke industry. And yet they seem to be all about this big image of wokeness and this big PR campaign. We got 100% vaccination and safety is our top priority. And but I just can't see how it's good business sense to fire dozens or scores or hundreds of employees that have been with you for 10, 20, 30 years that know what they're doing and work hard, are honest people. It's usually the best of people, by the way, that don't take the vaccine on conscience, because these people live by principles. That's why they won't take it on principle. Principle people tend to make really good employees. So it's usually the best employees that you're getting rid of. Exposing yourself to all this liability, all the money wasted on all this testing, and it just doesn't seem to make any business. Now, then again, I haven't run one of these businesses, but it just doesn't seem to make any business sense. So if I'm looking at it from a business sense, why keep up the charade? Why keep putting your employees through the ringer like this? I mean, it can't be helping their productivity. You reported on the mental health crisis, and I've experienced it amongst my clients. And I read about it in the statements they give me. So if I'm Shell, I'm thinking, as far as getting my employees back to work and having them work well and having morale go up and having productivity go up and reducing the wasted expenses and all this COVID nonsense, let's just stop the charade, stop the testing, stop the mandates, and just go back to work. Now, then this could also be in conjunction with the fact that it is unjust, inhumane, unethical, cruel to oppress and coerce people through the threatened loss of employment income to inject something in their bodies they don't want. That's without it being dangerous. It is dangerous, but without it being dangerous, it's still ethically repulsive to put somebody under the thumb and say, if you don't inject this foreign substance in your body, you're losing your job. For some people, that means your kids go hungry, your mortgage goes unpaid. Like I have clients in New Brunswick. That's what they're facing. They're selling their house, they're selling their car, so that they can figure out how to live, how to feed their kids, because they've been told no jab, no job. So you have to be an unfortunate human being to not have a pang of conscience when you're thinking about that. That I'm firing this person for no other reason than the fact that they have said no to injecting their body with a foreign substance, which is a perfectly reasonable position to take. And that's even before getting to the scientific fact that they don't work, because obviously they don't work. So obviously they're dangerous, obviously they don't work. But even putting that aside, it's still wrong to make somebody go through that, right? So if I'm a decent human being, at some point I'm going to say enough is enough, because my employees are suffering and they've told me, and I can't keep doing this to them and claim to be a decent human being. So I don't know if it has to be one or the other over at Shell. Maybe it's both. Hopefully it is. And so hopefully that they're a trendsetter with that, and we can get back to some human decency. I'm not a touchy-feely kind of guy. I'm a tough litigator, and emotion isn't my first priority. But at the same time, I do care about people. That's why I do what I do. I hate to see them suffer and be oppressed as if we're in some third world country. And that's what's going on. And it's just not okay to do that to people. And we've totally lost that over the last couple of years in our society. And so if we could start getting that back, that'd be nice. Because if we don't, the tyranny is going to continue. The oppression and the coercion and the cruelty is just going to continue. We need some human decency.
Let's talk a little bit about the tyranny that we're witnessing. What are your thoughts around what you've seen unfold in this country for the last 2 years?
The worst civil liberties crisis in the history of the country. And it's not like we haven't had civil liberties crisis before. We've got the residential school system. We got what happened to the Japanese during World War II. We got all kinds of things we can look at in history. And I would say this is the worst civil liberties crisis this country's ever experienced. And we're not handling it very well. We are, Canada as a nation is one of the most oppressive nations in the first world right now, and throughout COVID, I think. Many other countries have fared much better. And I think that speaks to our culture of embracing authoritarianism, embracing big government, justifying the means by the ends, very utilitarian, very collectivist, very socialist, very Marxist. And this is the practical result. When you as a culture take that view, the end result is that you will oppress minorities, you will not tolerate dissidents, because that's those are part and parcel with an authoritarian society. So right now, that's the problem, is we have these minorities, these dissidents, that, you know, the unwoke, who are saying, hey, let's be free, let's have individual responsibility and rights, let's not, you know, let's have the right to decline things in our body. And the majority is saying, no, to hell with you. If you're not going to toe the line, then you're a second-class citizen. And that's a culture thing. It's manifesting itself in the courts, in our politics, but I think it goes to our culture. And I think that's why you see this massive distinction between us and south of the border.
So growing up in Canada, I have never really felt that we were even close to going down the road that we've gone down. You know, I guess somehow I just didn't see that we were becoming that as a nation. I just wouldn't have seen any indicators to feel that we were moving into that much of a social, like what kind of pointed you in that direction?
You know, I get that a lot from my clients.
Like, I'm surprised that we have moved to where we are as a country. And so
I'm not, and I wasn't in 2020, but that is because of my unique experience at the Justice Center, right? I mean, you know, yes, when I went to law school, I did. I had some nice ideals about how free this country is and what a great place to be a lawyer who practices public law and tries to uphold rights and freedoms. And I had these ideas when I went to law school, ideals, and I had them when I left. And I thought, hey, this is great. I'm going to go work at the Justice Center and I'm going to help uphold rights and freedoms. And then I got there and I realized, whoa, you know, we're on the downward trend. We've been there for a while. It's just not obvious yet. Most people just can't see it yet because it's not really in daily life yet. And plus, you do acclimatize to tyranny, right? You know, you can look at all kinds of historical examples where people kind of, unfortunately, they get used to living under the tyranny, which means they can learn to live under it, which can be good. The problem is that you tend to forget, right? I mean, ask an average Chinese person living in China whether they're free or not. I mean, the answer will probably be bizarre, right? Because nobody alive remembers. It's been too long now.
Right.
But at the jurisprudential level, at the level of the cases that you know have been decided over the last 10, 15, 20 years and were decided in the last 5 years while I was litigating, you could see where this was going. You could see the circumcision of rights. You could see them being narrowed. You could see the court broadening the scope for what governments can just easily get away with under Section 1 of the Charter. You see the shift, and I would say, you know, really was around the year 2000. A lot of the old good judges that did a lot of the initial interpretation and application of charter rights were no longer on the bench, and they were replaced by, you know, more judges with a different ideology. Right, and it is ideology. It does come down to that. It is a myth that judges are completely neutral or unbiased or whatever term you want to use when it comes to constitutional rights. They use their worldviews, their paradigms, their political views to influence those decisions. Those decisions on our charter rights and on whether or not the violation of those has been justified. It's basically a treatise in political philosophy. And I'm sorry, but if you're a libertarian or you're a Marxist, your political philosophies are going to look radically different. And your understanding of what is good and right and justified are going to look radically different, right? If you're a collectivist, then you're gonna think. It's not that you're a bad person or you have bad ideas. You're going to think the world is a better place when there's a nice, big, benevolent government that has lots of power and individuals don't have a lot of rights and the government can really, direct where things go. If you're a libertarian, you're going to think, no, the world's a better place when people are more free and government is really limited. And even if there's these, natural evils that happen, we're going to let the people deal with them as best they can, even if that's messy, and leave government out of it. Because as soon as government tries to fix this mess, they will make it 10 times worse. It's, roughly what a libertarian believes. So if you look at judges like Major and Yakabushi and these guys you go back to Justice Rand, that's 50s and 60s, but these first two guys I mentioned were 80s and 90s. I think they view, I read their decisions and I conclude that they view the world in a more libertarian way, not in a Marxist way. And their decisions are different than decisions that you might get from Justice Abella, for example, who obviously values freedom less. And so, of course, this is all very high level and philosophical and unattainable for the average person. And so we get all these decisions prior to COVID that are, shrinking free speech, really almost eliminating freedom of religion, especially to the Trinity Western case. But it's not really manifesting in daily life yet. So except for the law nerds and the litigation, the constitutional litigators and those few people paying attention to it, what does it matter?
Right.
For example, do average Canadians give a hoot about who's on our Supreme Court? Do they know anything about the process? Are they even aware when a new Supreme Court justice is appointed? No, they're not. Why is that? Because they don't get it. Why do the Americans pretty much light their hair on fire every time a new Supreme Court justice has to be appointed? Because they know that those 9 promoted lawyers in Washington have way more control in the long run over their daily lives and their daily liberties than the president of the time. They know that. They get that. At a deep cultural level, the majority of Americans get that. Majority of Canadians don't. And we're paying the price for it now, right? Because for 20 years, we have not cared. When we elect our politicians, we don't give a wink of thought to who they might appoint on the bench, right? And the power that those people on the bench are going to have, right? And the ability of those people on the bench to change not just our law, but our whole constitutional order. They have the ability to do that, for better or for worse, right? So does the American Supreme Court, right? And our liberties in the long run, maybe not in a 6-month period, but over 2 decades, in the long run, those people, those appointed lawyers, I'm using that language intentionally. Justice Scalia used to talk that way. To remind people that, look, there's nothing particularly special about judges. They're really just promoted lawyers. Okay. Those people are going to have way more impact on whether or not our society remains a free one than any passing politician of the day. And that's, we're reaping that ignorance now. Because I think a lot of people thought, okay, well, yes, the governments have gone off the rails. They're acting as petty tyrants, but this is a country ruled by the rule of law. We have a constitution, and the courts will bring us out of this. The voice of reason will bring us. The third branch of government will function, will bring us out of this. It hasn't. It's failed. It hasn't brought us out. 2 years later, we're still living in this madness. We're still living under tyranny because the only institution that could effectively bring us out is the courts, and they don't want to, right? That's the thing, it's not about this, we're not like a third world nation in the sense that there's no impropriety at the courts, there's no bribes, this isn't Russia, that's not what it is. It's the fact that the judges on the bench interpret charter rights, interpret Section 1 of the Charter, take judicial notice. They do these things in a certain way that fits with how they view the law and how they view the world and what they think is best, right? These are not bad people doing bad things. These are people with particular views that are doing what they think is best. Justice Germain thought it was best to make Pastor Pawlowski engage in compelled speech, right? Libertarian Canadians say, well, no, that sounds like North Korea. And they're right. Well,
and compelled speech means that he just explain it a little bit so people understand what compelled speech is.
Compelled speech is basically taking the words of somebody else and shoving them into your mouth and making you speak them.
So what did he have to speak and when and where? What was that? What was that looking like?
My understanding of that ruling was that prior to criticizing AHS or criticizing the COVID narrative or saying anything that was counter narrative, he had to first preface it with the government's narrative, right? So he had to speak the government's words that were not his own. Now, what those words were specifically, I don't know. But that's the idea, is that he had to say something that wasn't his own thoughts or his own words, that was pro-government before he could criticize the government.
Wow.
Now, fortunately, that's a rare example of the rule of law working and of our courts working in some sense. When that was appealed to the Court of Appeal in Alberta, an injunction was sought to set that aside while the main appeal went ahead. A Court of Appeal justice stayed that part of Justice Germain's decision.
Okay.
So good, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a rare example of something actually, of a success. On civil liberties versus COVID tyranny, that's one of maybe 3 successes we've had in the last 2 years. So I'm happy about that. But that should not be an exception. That should be the rule. But that's been very much the exception. And I know a lot of average regular Canadians, a lot of my clients are very confused and distressed by this. And they make comments just like you said. I thought I was growing up in a free country. Actually, I have a lot of immigrants too. Like, I moved here to escape precisely the tyranny that you're all bringing in. And I'm very angry about that because that's not fair. I came here to get away from this. I've been here 20 years. I've built a life here. I built a business here. And now it looks just like the country I fled. Right. And that should really be telling for people. That should mean a little more. If people are, into this whole racism nonsense, that means a little more. They get tired of all these white Canadians saying, oh, I thought we lived in a free country. This is what I grew up in. Well, I got a lot of brown Canadians who came here because it was free. And they're pretty mad about that. And they have every right to be. But that's where we're going. And we got here in a way that is just difficult to grasp and difficult to see before it's too late. But that's why we, between our political system and our judicial system, we can't get out of this mess because our political system will never get us out of it. And let's face it, the majority of voters support these authoritarian policies. So politically, we can't get out of it. It's just not going to happen.
Right.
Sadly. I think the federal election is indicative of that. 5% voted for Bernier. It's just, a lot of people I know are like, how is that possible? Everybody I know in my rural neck of the woods voted for Bernier. So assuming there's no election fraud. But I think that's just the reality, right? You go to Toronto and Vancouver, and what's everybody voting for? Sing the tyrant. So and so our only hope is judicially, and judicially we can't get out of it because look, judges are a reflection of lawyers. Lawyers are a reflection of the culture, reflection of the populace, and the average Canadian is just doesn't regard authoritarianism as bad, doesn't regard collectivism as bad, and that gets into the thought process on what is justifiable under Section 1, what is the scope of these rights, etc. And here we are.
So when you were talking about the composition of the Canadian bench, you're saying the majority of them are liberal leaning, and this is going to, I guess, not serve those who value the freedom. So when you say value freedom over what? What's the opposite? If for those that don't value freedom, they value I don't think they value tyranny, but what replaces it?
Right. What they would call it safety, security,
like social responsibility.
Yeah, collectivism. They've again, it's not that they view themselves as tyrants or that they want to act what we might think is bad. They just simply have different values, right? They value safety, security, collectivism, the greater good, the public good, public interest,
over,
blah blah blah,
over individual. Good.
Right. Exactly. I mean, it's the old battle of ideas between the collectivist ideas that underlie communism and the individualistic ideas that underlie capitalism and the free market and personal responsibility, et cetera, right? And Canadians embraced this in the 60s and 70s when they embraced Tommy Douglas's idea of public health care. Worst idea ever. Right? And if I had been there, I would have been one of those few crazy libertarians that would have said, yeah, you'll be regretting this 40 years from now. Right? Would this mess be as bad if we did not have public health care? Right? But most Canadians just, whoa, because they think public health care is great. Right? And they think the Americans are just cruel to each other because they don't
take care of each other.
They don't take care of each other. Right? And the Americans are like, what? Yeah. Well, that's the thing, right? You can only have freedom with responsibility. With responsibility comes risk, right? And if you can't have your cake and eat it too. If you want to be free, you have to take responsibility and take risks, right? But if you don't want to take responsibility, if you don't want to take risks, you'll have to give up your freedom. And that a lot of Canadians have made that trade, thinking, hey, this feels good. Socialism always feels good, right? I mean, ask any Venezuelan 20 years ago, right? It felt good. It sounded good. I mean, only good people would do this. And there's this delayed effect, and I think it's difficult to understand. It's very philosophical and kind of out there in the ether of ideas. It doesn't seem concrete, and then all of a sudden, somehow, in a way that most people can't comprehend or see, you end up eating your dogs, or in our case, we end up not being able to go to church or go to a restaurant if we haven't injected our bodies or whatever, right? Whatever the dystopia looks like. We end up there in a way that's difficult to see and comprehend and really pin down.
Well, it's interesting because a new poll just came out, actually, and I thought this was interesting. So this was a poll of 1,500 participants, roughly just a little over 1,500. It says 27% of respondents say it would be okay to jail the unvaccinated for up to 5 days. So that's a quarter of the people polled, but 27% of respondents would be okay for an unvaccinated person to be put in jail. I mean, I'm trying to logically think through what the charge would be. What would the charge be? I mean, is there even I don't know that I can even justify that in my head.
Just make it up.
What the crime is.
Hey, the crime is not obeying. It's not obeying the government. It's not towing the line. It's not living for others, right? That altruistic collectivist idea, right? Ayn Rand gets into this a lot. Any libertarian nerds listening will know who Ayn Rand is. The collectivist idea is you don't live for yourself. You live for others. And if you live for yourself, you're selfish, and selfish is bad, right?
Okay.
At an emotional, philosophical level, that's what it comes to. That's how Canadians think, right?
But it's a small percent. I mean, 27%. It's definitely the minority who believe this. Now,
but this is an extreme belief. What you just said.
Mm-hmm.
Jail time.
Yes, that is extreme.
Broaden that out to something less extreme. Like, should we keep people out of restaurants? Well, then you're going to get into a majority of Canadians who believe that.
Potentially, yeah.
That's historically, socially, that's a big deal. That people believe that. Okay. Even setting aside the science. I mean, obviously, you have your head in the sand to think that that's scientifically logical, right? Because the vaccines don't stop transmission and infection, and that really wasn't that hard to figure that out. We all know that now, unless you really got your head in the sand. But it wasn't that hard to see later. I mean, I always would joke, the difference between conspiracy theories and truth is 3 months, and we've seen a lot of that. But that's a big deal historically. Things that at first blush, that's fairly benign. Just keep people out of restaurants. Well, there's a particular country where that was how it started for a particular group of people, 6 million of which were murdered. That's how it started. Because, as any historian knows, you don't go from relative freedom to murderous tyranny in one fell swoop. Unless it's violent overtake. If it's happening within a nation and not from outside, you don't get there in one fell swoop. You don't. It's the boiling the frog, right? You don't get there all at once, because if you did, there would be riots in the street, right?
Right.
How did we go from keeping those people out of theaters and restaurants to bulldozing their dead bodies into pits and camps? It took a few years, and it took a lot of steps. And it took a lot of propaganda to demonize and otherize these people, right? And to get what used to be decent, normal thinking people to eventually come around to, we can keep them out of restaurants. We can jail them. We can segregate them. We can fire them all. Right? I mean,
and then it becomes the kind of slippery slope.
It is.
Right.
Of course, slippery slope is a real thing. It's not always happening, but it's a real thing, and we're on that, And I get people asking me all the time for my candid assessment. How far are we on that slope, and how likely are we to stop? And should I flee the country? I get that question a lot. Should I flee the country?
Oh, I've had a lot of people have that conversation as well.
That's a pretty desperate thing to be asking.
I would agree.
It's like. That was the conversation that people were having in the 1930s. Should we flee the country? It's like, yeah, if these are your circumstances, if you're never going to take this thing and you got kids, and you're not crazy to be thinking about. And I know a lot of people that have fled the country, and I use that word on purpose. They don't want to go. Family here, businesses here, their life is rooted here. They are fleeing to that beacon of freedom that has been for a quarter of a millennia, to get away from not just the current tyranny, but what they see coming as potentially taking my kids away, restricting my freedom to the point where I can't even leave my house.
Possible prison time.
Yeah, they're looking at this and rationally and saying, well, everybody, it's madness now, and why should I think the madness is going to end? And madness just keeps getting worse, right? It's just as much madness to put somebody in jail as it is to keep them out of a restaurant. The only difference is the severity of the practical impact, right? One thing can bleed into the other pretty quick if there's no logic or decent or human decency or sanity that's reigning there.
Mm-hmm. Now, there's a lot of things happening in the world right now, sort of many extremes, I think. We just reported on the fact that the UK has announced they're lifting all of their mandates. They're lifting the mask mandate. They're lifting the vaccination mandate. And basically, it was sort of quoted that they are not going to criminalize people anymore for not wearing a mask and things like that. So you see these kinds of things happening in the UK. There's other European countries that are following suit as well. And then you've got Canada with just a week or two ago, where we announced that we're going to be taxing the unvaccinated in Quebec, right? It's such a huge cavernous difference between the things that we're seeing happening around the world with this. So I understand where you're coming from with Canada being one of the most oppressive at the moment. But what you're seeing around the world, are we seeing an unraveling? Are we seeing sort of a returning to looking at the evidence and saying, okay, whether anyone wants to admit, we had it wrong or we responded wrongly, but just to change course. Are you hopeful that this is, let's talk about, let's throw Shell reversing their mandate in that, which I think some people are hopeful that could be a trend. Where are you pessimistic? Are you optimistic? Where are you on the spectrum of watching all of this unfold?
Well, I try to consider myself, I do consider myself a realist. I try to be realistic. I know most people consider me a pessimist. A lot of people are very rah, hope. We're gonna get through this. It's gonna turn around. I have a lot of clients and people tell me, man, you're pretty dark about this. But I don't see any cause for hope in Canada. Now, I do around the world, yes, and that's good. And hey, hopefully that either means that people can go to that, or that maybe will eventually have an effect in here. But as far as any reason to hope that we can internally change here, I just don't see it. Our institutions are all, I would say, ideologically corrupt, insofar as they've embraced an ideology of authoritarianism and collectivism. All of our, our universities, all of our government bodies, all of our, a lot of our big nonprofit, they've just embraced wokeism. And the woke thing to do is to parrot the narrative and crush any dissent. So I just see very, very, very few examples of anybody in any kind of important position of power or influence speaking up. And I think most of them fully support it. And maybe there's a small group that don't support it, but they, and they aren't courageous enough to put their neck on the line. There's obviously the few rare examples, there's the politicians like Bernier and Hillier, and there's the odd institutional leader, but they're so few and so far between. They're so far outnumbered. I just don't, you can have all these regular rural Ontarians and rural Albertans and rural people living in Western BC that have their head on straight and think properly about this and support freedom. But unfortunately, they're not going to really have a big impact. We saw that in the last federal election. Unless we get at the institutional level, we get some people deciding to stand up and stand for truth and justice and freedom. How do we get out of this, right? Mm-hmm. Unless the courts do something, unless enough politicians do something, unless enough universities do something, unless enough. Let's go to the lawyers. How many lawyers and law firms are advocating for freedom and advocating for getting rid of the COVID tyranny and
how many are? What are you saying?
Yeah, very, very, very few. And it's not just that there's very, very few doing what I'm doing. And then there's a whole bunch that are passive about it, neutral and passive, because I used to think they were. What I've seen the last few months is that there's a lot of lawyers, especially the more influential, important ones, a lot of big law firms that are actively pushing this, right? They're actively telling their clients, go ahead, do this. We got you covered. The law is going to change in our favor. We're going to make it happen, right? Fire these people. You have to have these policies. You need to do this. The law firms are doing it amongst themselves, right? Law firms all across. Well, I know in Calgary, because that's where I'm talking to paralegals, especially, but all across the country, law firms are firing their assistants and paralegals who won't take the shot, not because of science or safety, but because this is the firm's policy. Hell or high water. I got paralegals that have been paralegals for 18 years, 28 years, calling me like, my managing partner told me I'm done. I'm done, just like that. I've been here my entire career. Mm-hmm. I'm a great worker, and it's just, I've asked them for reasons and studies and supports, and none of it. It's just nope. We're gonna have 100% vaccination, right? It's about the ideology and the image of being able to say we're 100% vaccination. Why? Because of safety. Mm-hmm. Really? Can you explain that scientifically? No, but that's the way it is. Right?
Okay, so
this is a problem, right? Because these are lawyers.
Well, and that's what I want to talk about for a second. I mean, we're talking about the burden of proof. Is there not a requirement that these decisions need to be proved? And where are we at with that? Why has this not why have they not had to bring forward a burden of proof? You know what I mean? Like
one of the examples I use with people is, imagine a situation where you have a store that's being looted. You have 100 men that are looting the store, and you have 10 police officers who are standing there thinking, can we do something? No, we can't. They outnumber us 10-1. So the looting continues, right? In that scenario, there's no rule of law for that moment, for that 20 minutes that the looting happens, right? Because everybody's doing it all at once, and the law can't keep up. Again, this is even assuming that the law wants to and would catch up. It can't. So right now, you have private and public bodies that are getting away with whatever they want in the name of COVID. Okay, the rule of law is completely broken down when it comes to the area of civil liberties and COVID, right? Whether it's in the employment context or at universities or governments, they move so fast. They do it all at once, and the law can't, even if it wants to, it can't keep up, right? By the time you finally get something filed and starts to move it, it's 4 months later, and all this damage has been done, all these things have happened, and you can't properly rectify it, right? So that's what's happening right now. Is practically speaking, people are getting away with what would have been prior to COVID patently unlawful. It may end up being unlawful or may not end up being unlawful, right? I think the law, because judges ultimately mold the law, they can bend the law to accommodate COVID if they want to, and that's what I've seen for 2 years. So if that continues, then we're gonna see a lot of law change instead of COVID policies changing because of what the law was prior to COVID, which is unfortunate. But that's kind of how our system works as a common law system, right? It changes with time, to hopefully improve as society changes. So I think right now, practically speaking, everybody's getting away with it because the law can't keep up. It's like the 10 officers that can't keep up with the 100 looters. That's why it's everybody. I mean, all these unpaid leaves, it's all unlawful constructive termination, right? All these government mandates, they're all gross violations of the charter that, in my opinion, are obviously unjustified. But it takes, again, even if the law wants to, it takes years to catch up with this stuff. So you're going to get away with it practically in the short run. And then there's the fact that by the time lawyers like me want to file all this stuff to catch up with it, the law can, again, the judges can just change the law to accommodate COVID instead of striking down the COVID policies to accommodate the law, which is really the way it should be. And when you have the force or the weight of 95% of the legal profession behind changing the law to accommodate COVID, I don't blame them for thinking they're going to get away with it. All these universities that are kicking out all these students, all these employers firing all these people. I don't blame them for believing their lawyers when their lawyers say to them, "You'll get away with this. We'll be able to handle this." Of course, because first of all, they number people like me 10 to 1, and they got deeper pockets because their clients are the ones with more money. But then there's the fact of, hey, I mean, we look at the courts and we say, well, clearly the courts are on side with government, with the COVID narrative, with the mandates. Everything we've seen from all the courts all across the country is, good job, government, keep going. That's all we see. If I'm a lawyer on the other side, I think, we're going to win this. The law will change. We'll make a change. That's how it works. So, anyways, all this to say, these are some of the reasons why I don't see any cause for internal hope in Canada. Maybe, if the whole world embraces freedom again, the weight of that could crush in a good way. But internally, no. I see decades of more tyranny. Right?
Oh, well, that's depressing.
I'm sure it was. I'm sure it was for the Eastern Europeans. When they were looking at this in the 1950s and 60s. I mean, they signed up for 40 years of it. A lot of them died. Never saw it.
What about the international courts? What about like the Nuremberg trials? What about those bodies that have intervened in the past?
The past was different. I mean, look at the United Nations. Look at what it's supposed to be and what it started out as. Right? I mean, it's more a force for evil and injustice than it is good. Now, it didn't start out that way. Things corrupt over time. The slow march through the institution, the Marxists with their authoritarian collectivist ideas are never going to go away. They're always going to be there, and they're always going to be infiltrating. And those ideas are they both feel good and sound good to those who are gullible, but do want to try and make the world a better place, but are gullible about what ideas actually do. And then there's the whole power dynamic. I haven't got into that. The fact is, power is like a drug. And you get a few shots of it, you become like a heroin addict, right? I mean, I was there in the beginning when AHS first started doing this. They weren't power-hungry tyrants in the beginning. They were doing what they thought was best. They were just trying to help. I think a lot of them really thought this is just going to be temporary. They didn't oppress people the way they do now. They didn't. There was a marked change in tone. They weren't running around just exercising their power for the heck of it. They were just trying to manage a crisis. That's how it started. That's how it always starts. But then, they felt the drug, the power, and I've seen it. I've watched it for 2 years because I was there in the beginning when it started, and that power has acted like a drug with a lot of these people, as it does with anybody. We're all susceptible to it, right? Some of us may be a little better at it than others, but use Tolkien. I think Tolkien got this really well in his writings. He talks about the 9 ring wraiths, right? And 9 rings of power were given to men who above all others desire power. Like, he bang on and capturing humanity and capturing, the universal human vice of desiring power. And this is why people who are aware of history, they say all the time, you can't give power to government and expect it to get it back willingly. You just won't, right? That's basic human nature. That's basic history, right? Here we are, whether it's AHS, whether it's Kenny, whether it's Trudeau, whether it's whatever. If you give power to these people, you can't expect them to just give it back. Most of them are not Socrates or philosopher kings. They're not going to willingly, easily give it up. Of course not. Right? It feels too good. You're like a heroin addict. So here we are. How do we get it back? You're not going to get it back just by asking.
Do you not think or believe that, sort of the idea of the information that's coming out, people are starting to see the truth in the sense of, these vaccines did not stop transmission. So really, at the end of the day, we can all catch, we can all carry, we can all spread. Are you hopeful that sort of this I guess the morphing of the narrative with the general population might change people's mentality towards, even, like one of the other statistics here, 2/3 of Canadians say they are in favor of mandated vaccines. So the majority of the people polled in this poll said they were in favor of mandating vaccines. But I mean, what I'm getting at is if it's fully proven that you are still susceptible to catching, carrying, spreading, then, do you not hope that kind of information and that being sort of played out in society now? I mean, if you look, the majority of cases right now are in the vaccinated population. Being in the vaccinated population, still having to mask, still having to pay for tests to be able to travel, still sort of being penalized. Do you not think or hope that at some point, even the vaccinated group, even the people that are, the 2/3, might feel differently, might change their mind, might be convinced?
I hope for it, and it's possible, but I don't expect it. I have no reason to expect it.
You're not seeing it. You're not. Okay.
No. The odd person here or there, of course. But that's increasing the population of those who are against this from 6% to 7%.
Mm-hmm.
That's just not going to cut it. It's a numbers game. It's just not going to cut it.
Yeah.
You got to get some sort of threshold of a significant minority of people before the scales really tip. I don't see that, and I think again that goes back to the cultural aspect, right? In the States, they're able to hang on to their freedom because there's still 40, 50, maybe even 60% of the population that have this freedom is just ingrained culturally into them, right? Well, I think it's mixed up with patriotism too, which is like a concept foreign to Canadians, maybe even foreign to me as a Canadian. Unfortunately, I am a Canadian, and patriotism is completely a foreign concept to me. I don't even understand it. Liking my country, that doesn't even, even when the country was likable, I didn't really particularly like it, but at least it was likable. It was a free, decent place. So yeah, I think you're inherent in your question is the presumption that reason is prioritized by most people. It's not. They prioritize pleasure and emotions, what feels good, what sounds good.
But I can't imagine it feels good to do what you were told and still be suffering, still being penalized, right? Still being forced into restrictions that they too have to live by.
If they view it that way, and that would be the reasonable, intelligent way to view it. But that's mixed up with all the fear that the propaganda has stirred up in them, and the desire for security and the desire for less responsibility. I want the government to be responsible for this, right? I just want to get my CERB paycheck. I don't want to work. I don't want to be responsible. I don't want to take risks, financial, health, physical, emotional. I don't want to take risks. I want no risk, no responsibility. The government can have all that. I just want what feels good and what's pleasurable. And I'm sorry, that's ingrained in Canadian culture, right? We tend to be more risk adverse, more responsibility adverse, and a little more lazy than other places in the world. And the practical result of that is we will more easily, try to shirk some of that off to the government, because hey, that feels good in the moment, right? That gives us what we want in the moment, right? I mean, a lot of Canadians are like, I'll just sit home and collect my CERB check.
Yeah.
Right? And the Americans are like, what's the matter with you? Why would you do that? Right? Don't you see how you're becoming dependent on the state? The Canadians are like, what are you talking about? right? At a cultural level. Now, again, I'm not. This is a generalization. Do rural Albertans feel this way? No, a lot of them don't. But are they representative of the rest of the country? I'm sorry, they're not. Not representative of the East Coast. Let me tell you, that's where I'm from.
Yeah.
I've been in Alberta 6 years, but I hail from the East Coast. No.
Very different.
They're all government dependency. Right. I'll just work 6 months of the year, and the other 6 months I'll sit home and collect my EI. Right. Sounds good. Right? Government dependency. We've been doing that for 20 years too. Look where it leads us. Right? Right? We're not responsible for our health. The government is. We won't take risks for our health. The government can take all those risks. We'll just collect EI, and the government will pay for all of our health benefits. And this sounds good and feels good, right? And unfortunately, it usually takes 20 or 40 years for it to catch up. And that's what it's taken for us, right? Tommy Douglas's mistake has taken 40 years to catch up with us. Well, in a dramatic sense. I mean, I think it's been catching up for a while, but in a dramatic sense, it's catching up with us. If the government wasn't in control of your health, which it never should be, could they really have done as much damage as they've done the last 2 years? I don't think so.
Right. Well, before we wrap up, give me an idea of some of the things that you have coming up. What are you working on? Anything you can shed a little light on, or?
Well, I'm going to have some civil suits against some employers for firing their employees, assuming they don't all settle. I have a human rights complaint in Ontario against the University of Guelph. I'm going to have other human rights complaints against other universities. There's a long list.
Totally understandable. Anything that you suspect you're going to have a snapshot of understanding whether it's going for or against you? Anything that soon, or are we still looking a ways out?
I'm definitely in it for the long game. I'm not busting really fast on any of my particular cases. I explain to my clients, there isn't a whole lot of hope of winning, but if it is, we have to take the long game. You could take the short game approach in the first 6 months, which a lot of us, hardly anybody did. Unfortunately, we kind of let it gain its momentum, and then we went after it and just completely fell flat on our face. And so I think now the only way to win this is to take the long game approach and to slog away for the next 10 years while the tyranny continues, and we just keep chipping away at it and hope eventually we can chip away at it. That was Wilberforce's approach. We're not going to get rid of slavery in 6 months, but if we keep at it for 40 years, maybe we will, right? It was the same thing in Eastern Europe under the Iron Curtain. I think that's my, which is a very depressing approach, I know, but that's my general approach is, hey, we're not going to get out of this soon. It's too late for that now, but and maybe we'll never get out of it. But the right thing to do is to fight. As long as we can fight, we must. That's the right thing to do. Let's do it. And one of my clients feel the same way. They understand when I tell them, like, your chances are not good. Before you spend any money on me, you need to know that. I'm not going to talk you up about your chances so that you'll hire me and pay me. You need to know our chances are not good, right? The winds are against us. But fight we must, fight we will. And there is some hope that whether it's 40 years or 14 years or 4 years, we may eventually get out of this if we just keep beating on the door. And, of course, in litigation, part of your strategy is not simply to win in court. It's to just keep banging on the door until it's the story of the unrighteous judge and the old lady who won't leave him alone. Finally, not because of justice or righteousness, but because he wants to get rid of her because she won't leave him alone. He gives her the justice that she needs, right? It's the same thing here. If you just keep suing the government, you just keep suing AHS, you just keep beating the drum, maybe eventually, finally, you'll get somewhere, even if it's not in the official sense through a court order that you want, but finally the government relents, right? I mean, that's, why is it getting better other places in the world? Part of it is because the freedom fighters have just kept up the fight, and finally they wear down the government, right? That's if there is any source of hope in our country, that's where it is enough people will fight hard enough and long enough that finally will wear away bit by bit at the tyranny until finally it crumbles. Well, that's my litigation approach.
Okay. So. Let's hope it doesn't take 10 years to get out of this, but
Omega's a long ways away.
yeah. Well, I want to thank you for coming and sharing your perspective with us today and just filling us in. And again, hopefully we can stay in touch and you can keep me sort of in the loop of what's coming down and what we're seeing. And let's hope we see more change coming through other, decisions being made, through other legal proceedings happening, perhaps even with influences from big corporations that are making change, and other countries making change and moving away from mandates. Let's hope that that will have a bit better influence on decisions here. But I wanted to thank you for coming and sharing with us today.
You're welcome. Thanks for hearing me out.